I need you to stay with me for a moment because what I am about to say is not simple and it is not light. There is something I finally allowed myself to acknowledge out loud, something people love to judge before they ever try to understand. I will say this gently, carefully, and with respect. She is over 45. I am not going to tell you more than that right now, not because I am hiding, but because I want you to feel what I felt before the number ever mattered. I want you to hear my heart before you measure it. I want you to understand why age became irrelevant to me long before it ever became visible. And I want you to listen not as the world listens, but as one woman who knows what it means to live, to lose, to love deeply, and to still be standing. Before I say anything else, let me slow this down with you for a second. If something in your chest just shifted even slightly, I hope you will stay close to this space with me. If this moment feels gentle to you, you can let the video breathe by giving it a quiet like. If you want to keep walking through these thoughts with me, subscribing is just a soft way of staying connected. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. And if this feels like something someone you care about needs to hear, share it with your friends or family. Some conversations deserve to travel further than we expect. Now, let me talk to you, just you. I know what the world says about age. I know how quickly people reduce a woman to a number once she crosses an invisible line they never explain but always enforce. I have watched it happen my entire life. I have seen brilliant, warm, deeply alive women slowly spoken about as if they were fading when in reality they were becoming clearer, calmer, and more powerful in ways youth never offers. And somewhere along my own path through building, failing, starting again, loving, losing, and rebuilding myself, I stopped seeing age as time passing. I started seeing it as depth accumulating. When I look at her, I do not see years, I see understanding. I see patience that was earned the hard way. I see a softness that survived disappointment without becoming bitter. I see a woman who knows the difference between noise and meaning. Tell me something honestly. Have you ever noticed how the most beautiful conversations come from people who have lived enough to stop performing? Have you felt that quiet confidence that comes from someone who no longer needs to prove they are worthy of love? There was a time in my life when I thought intensity was love, when speed felt like connection, when urgency disguised itself as passion. But time has a way of teaching you what lasts. It strips away the excitement that burns fast and leaves behind something steadier, something warmer, something that does not rush you, does not demand you, does not compete with the world for your attention. It simply sits beside, and understands. And that kind of presence, the kind that does not flinch when silence arrives, that does not panic when things slow down, that kind of presence does not come from being young. It comes from being lived. I imagine you listening right now, maybe wondering if I'm talking about you, maybe wondering if the years you carry have made you less visible, less chosen, less desired. Let me ask you something and answer it honestly in your heart. Do you really believe love is meant only for the unmarked? Or do you feel deep down that the lines you carry are proof that you stayed open even when it would have been easier to close yourself off? She does not rush me. She does not try to impress me. She does not need constant reassurance. There is a calm in the way she listens and a weight in the way her words land when she speaks. I feel like she has already thought about how her truth will sit in my chest. That kind of care changes you. It slows you down. It makes you want to be better, without asking you to become someone else. I know what people will say when they hear a number. I know the assumptions that come next. But what they will never see is the way she understands my silences, the way she senses when my mind is full and does not push, the way she knows that love does not need constant proof, just consistent presence. Tell me, have you ever loved someone enough to let them breathe instead of holding on tighter out of fear? There is a maturity in loving later in life that no one prepares you for. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not beg to be seen. It is built in small moments, shared mornings, unspoken understanding, a glance that says, I see you exactly as you are today, not as you were, not as you might become just now. And that kind of love feels like home in a way nothing else ever has. I am aware that some of you might be waiting for the reveal, for the exact number, for the detail that makes this story easier to label. But stay with me, stay with the feeling instead. Because what matters is not the age itself, but the courage it took to stop caring about what age was supposed to mean. What matters is choosing connection over approval, depth over display, truth over trend. Let me ask you something quietly. If love arrived for you later than you expected, would you turn it away just to match someone else's timeline? Or would you honor the version of yourself who survived long enough to recognize real love when it finally stood in front of you? There is more to this story, more that I have not said yet. And what comes next may challenge even more assumptions than this moment already has. When I think about why this matters so much to me, I realize it is not because of what people might say, it is because of what I almost missed by listening to them for too long. There was a version of me that believed love had an expiration date, that passion belonged to the early chapters of life, and that everything after a certain age was meant to be quieter, smaller, less demanding of the heart. That belief was comfortable, it required no risk, and it was wrong. She did not arrive loudly. There was no dramatic moment where everything stopped and the world rearranged itself. She arrived the way truth usually does. Slowly, almost invisibly, through consistency, through conversations that did not need an ending, through listening that felt intentional, through a presence that did not lean on me, but stood firmly beside me. And over time, something shifted inside me that I had not felt in years. A sense of rest. I want to ask you something personal. When was the last time someone made you feel rested just by being near you? Not excited, not distracted, rested. As if your nervous system finally understood that it did not have to be on guard anymore. There is a misconception that love later in life is cautious because it is afraid. In my experience, it is cautious because it is wise. It knows what breaks easily and what bends without snapping. She knows the cost of misunderstanding. She knows how silence can either wound or heal depending on how it is held. And she chooses her words the way someone chooses what to keep when everything else has already been lost once before. People talk about chemistry as if it belongs only to youth. But chemistry changes shape. It becomes quieter, deeper, more intelligent. It shows up in the way she remembers what matters to me without writing it down. In the way she does not compete with my work, but understands it. In the way she does not shrink herself to make me comfortable and does not ask me to grow into something I am not. That balance is rare, and it is not taught early in life. I imagine you listening, perhaps nodding, perhaps holding a thought you have not shared with anyone. Maybe you have felt invisible at times. Maybe you have wondered if the world had already decided what kind of love you were allowed to receive. Let me tell you something clearly. Love does not retire. Desire does not disappear. Depth does not become less attractive. The only thing that changes is how honest we become about what we need. She does not chase intensity. She understands steadiness. She understands that attraction does not have to announce itself. Sometimes it simply settles in and refuses to leave. When she looks at me, there is no question in her eyes about who she is or what she brings. That confidence is not loud. It does not need validation. It is rooted. And being seen by someone who is rooted changes how you see yourself. Have you ever noticed how freeing it feels to be with someone who does not need you to fill their emptiness? Someone who arrives whole, not perfect, but complete enough to share instead of take. That is what maturity offers. Love, not fewer emotions, but cleaner ones. I know the world will want to reduce this to a headline, a number, a judgment, but love does not exist to be digestible. It exists to be felt. And what I feel with HR is not confusion. It is clarity. It is waking up without that quiet pressure to perform. It is knowing that when things are difficult, we will talk instead of retreat. It is trusting that disagreement will not turn into distance. There is something else people do not talk about. When you love someone who has lived, you inherit their resilience. You feel safer taking emotional risk because you know the person beside you understands consequences. She has cried before. She has rebuilt before. She knows that endings do not mean failure. They mean experience. And that knowledge makes her kinder, not colder. Let me ask you another question. One that deserves honesty. If someone looked at you today, truly looked, would they see a woman who has given up on love or a woman who has simply become selective? There is a difference and it matters. I am aware that curiosity is building. I can feel the question forming in your mind. You want to know the exact age. You want the detail that either company confirms or challenges your expectations. I will tell you this much for now. The numbers surprised people before they ever heard the story, and it will probably do the same again. But numbers do not explain connection. They never have. What I am trying to share with you is not a defense. It is an invitation to see love through a lens that does not punish women for surviving time. An invitation to believe that the most meaningful connection of your life might arrive after you stop waiting for it to look a certain way. There is a reason I have not said everything yet, and there is a reason I am choosing my words carefully. Because the next part of this story is not about what the world thinks. It is about what she felt when she realized she might be judged for simply existing honestly. I think the hardest moment for her was not realizing that people might judge. She already knew that the hardest moment was deciding whether she should protect herself by staying silent or honor herself by being honest. There's a quiet kind of courage in that decision that most people never see. The courage to stand in your truth knowing it may cost you comfort, knowing it may cost you approval, knowing it may even cost you love from people who only love the version of you that fit their expectations. She did not ask me to defend her. She did not rehearse explanations or prepare arguments. She simply looked at me once and said something that stayed with me. She said, "I have lived long enough to know that hiding only teaches people that there is something to be ashamed of, and I am not ashamed of the life that shaped me." When she said that, I felt something unlock in me because I realized how often we ask women to shrink their stories to make other people comfortable. I want to ask you something gently. How many times have you softened your truth so it would be easier for someone else to swallow? How many times have you downplayed your experience, your wisdom, your years just to avoid making someone uneasy? And how did that feel inside your body when you did it? What I admire most about her is not her confidence, it is her honesty. She does not pretend time has not touched her. She respects it. She knows exactly what it gave her and exactly what it took. She does not romanticize the past or fear the future. She stands firmly in the present. And loving someone who lives there teaches you to stop negotiating with ghosts. There was a moment, a quiet one, when she asked me if I was sure. Not in a dramatic way, not with insecurity, but with clarity. She asked if I was prepared to choose her, knowing that some people would never try to understand. That question was not about age, it was about alignment, about whether I valued depth more than applause, about whether I was ready to be seen choosing something real instead of something convenient. I did not answer right away, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to answer honestly. And the truth is, seeing her felt less like a leap and more like coming back to myself. It felt like choosing peace over performance, substance over symbolism. Have you ever felt that kind of certainty? The kind that does not rush, but also does not hesitate. There is a softness to her strength that is rare. She does not demand space. She naturally occupies it. She does not raise her voice to be heard. People listen because there is weight in her words. That kind of presence does not come from youth. It comes from being tested and remaining kind anyway. I know some of you listening may be carrying a quiet fear, a fear that time has made you less desirable, less chosen, less worthy of being loved openly. Let me say this to you clearly. The right kind of love does not arrive to collect something from you. It arrives to recognize you, and recognition requires history. It requires layers. It requires a life that has been lived. When I imagine the judgment she might face, I do not feel protective in an aggressive way. I feel protective in a calm way, the way you protect something precious by holding it steady, not by hiding it. I am not interested in convincing everyone. I am interested in honoring what is real, and what is real between us is not fragile. It does not crack under opinions. She once told me that love later in life feels different because you no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You learn that safety is not boring. It is sacred. And that idea stayed with me, because how many of us were taught that love had to hurt to be meaningful? How many of us mistook chaos for connection? If you are listening and feeling something stir, I want you to ask yourself this. If love showed up for you exactly as you are today, with everything you have lived through written quietly in your eyes, would you let yourself receive it? Or would you step back because you think you should have arrived earlier? There is still something I have not said, something that explains why the number matters less than the moment it was spoken, and what happened between us when honesty finally replaced hesitation. There was a night when the conversation stopped feeling theoretical and became personal in a way neither of us could avoid anymore. We were not debating ideas or values. We were sitting inside the truth of what choosing each other would actually mean. She did not dramatize it. She did not ask for reassurance wrapped in romance. She simply asked me to listen, not as someone who admired her, but as someone who might walk beside her openly. She told me that being judged for her age was not new. What was new was the risk of being judged while loving someone she truly wanted. There is a difference between being strong alone and being strong while attached. When you love later in life, you are not afraid of heartbreak the way you were before. You are afraid of wasting what is real by letting fear speak louder than truth. And I could feel how much she had already weighed that cost. I want to pause here and ask you something that matters. Have you ever met someone who did not need to convince you of who they were because their life had already done the explaining? Someone who did not rush intimacy because they respected it too much to hurry. Someone who understood that love is not proven by intensity but by consistency. That is who she is. When she spoke about her age, she did not lower her voice. She did not apologize. She stated it the way someone states a fact that carries no shame. And in that moment, I realized how deeply the world trains women to brace themselves for rejection the moment they tell the truth. As if honesty itself is a risk, as if existing fully requires permission. I watched her closely then, not to assess her, but to learn from her. There was a calm acceptance in her that I recognized immediately. It was the calm of someone who knows they will be fine even if they are not chosen. That kind of self-respect is magnetic. It does not beg. It does not see hazy. It invites. And if you step into it, you do so because you want to, not because you're persuaded. You might be wondering how I felt in that moment. The truth is, I felt relief. Relief that I did not have to pretend this was anything other than what it was. Relief that love did not need to be dressed up in youth to feel alive. Relief that I could choose depth without explaining myself to the world. Because once you have lived long enough, you understand that the loudest opinions rarely belong to the people who know how to love. Well, she asked me one more thing that night. Not about age, about visibility. She asked if I would still choose her when others reduced her to a number. When curiosity turned into commentary, when admiration turned into judgment. That question stayed with me long after the conversation ended because it revealed something essential. Loving her would mean standing in clarity, not defensiveness. It would mean choosing quietly, not proving loudly. Let me ask you something now, and I want you to sit with it. If someone chose you without needing the world to agree, would you trust that choice or would you doubt it because you have been taught to measure love by approval instead of intention? There is still one thing I have not shared, one moment that explains why I stopped hesitating and started understanding what this love was asking of me. And when I tell you, the number itself will finally make sense in a way that has nothing to do with judgment. The moment I finally said the number out loud, it did not land the way people imagine these moments land. There was no pause filled with fear, no tightening in the room, no shift away from each other. What happened instead was quieter and far more revealing. She smiled, not because the number was small, but because the truth was no longer carrying weight alone. It was being held. She is 52. I am saying it now because the story needs truth, not suspense anymore. And because I want you to hear what followed, not what people assume should have followed. When I said it, she did not ask if I was sure. She did not search my face for doubt. She simply breathed out, as if something heavy she had carried privately was finally shared. That breath told me everything I needed to know about how long women are asked to hold their reality alone. I want you to listen closely here. The number did not change how I saw her. It clarified why I felt so safe with her. Why conversations felt complete instead of performative. Why silence felt comforting instead of awkward. Why affection felt grounded instead of anxious. 52 does not represent loss. It represents accumulation of patience, of discernment, of emotional intelligence that does not rush to be understood. She told me later that the fear was never about me rejecting her. It was about the world misunderstanding her, about being framed as something she is not, about having her love reduced to a headline instead of a human connection. And that is Here's something inside me settled permanently. Because love that survives honesty is love that does not need protection. It needs presence. Let me ask you something that deserves respect. If someone loved you knowing your exact age, your history, your heartbreaks, your resilience, your softness, would you still feel the need to apologize for the life you lived before they arrived? Or would you finally let yourself be chosen without footnotes? She did not ask me to defend her age. She asked me to see her, and I do. I see a woman who knows when to speak and when to stay quiet. A woman who understands that desire does not fade with time. It refines as itself. A woman who knows her body not as something to prove, but as something to inhabit fully. That kind of self-possession is rare, and it is deeply attractive. I am aware that some people will still judge. They always do. But judgment says more about fear than truth. It reveals who is terrified of time, who equates youth with worth, who has not yet learned that the most meaningful connections arrive when we stop rushing toward them and start standing still long enough to recognize them. If you are listening right now and you are over 45, over 50, or simply carrying years you were taught to